learn more about that.
You may not make circular depressions around vines to retain moisture.
Okay, because that would be work, right? So if you had a vine and then you were putting a depression around it so that when the water came in, it would stay. Today, I think we use mulch, but if you were doing that, so how would you deal with that situation? They're saying not on, Hawaii, Qatan, not
What
on
page?
Kol Hawaii.
You may not. Rabbi Elazar Ben Azariah says you may not make new irrigation channels in the sabbatical year, but the sages say you may make new irrigation channels in the sabbatical year, and you may repair damaged ones on the intermediate days of a festival. You may also repair damaged public water supplies and dig them out, repair paths, roads, and immersion pools, do whatever the public needs, and mark the real sites. Officers of the court may go out to uproot kilayim.
Who remembers what kilayim is?
I know it's plural.
Yes, there is that. Kilayim are when there's something grafted on or there's something planted too close, the things that are done together kind of pieces. So some things need to be done and can be done during Kol HaMoed.
It's about these boundaries that you're supposed to keep.
Yes.
The species separate.
Species separately, exactly. And if there's anything that gets grafted one onto another piece, so that would be a problem.
Okay.
You're referring to
at least the diavod.
But you're referring to the land of Israel only.
In which piece? Are you talking about, this was written, this is the Babylonian Talmud, so I don't know that they were specifying what was going to be done, quote, in the West, right? So, Diane would pick
Okay.
up.
Now, surely if you are allowed to water from a newly flowing spring which might collapse and involve heavy repairs, you would be allowed to water from an established one which is unlikely to collapse. So why mention the established one?
So this is the question they ask. We're talking about newly flowing. What's the problem with newly flowing? Oh, they might require heavy repairs. So that's a whole lot of work to be done on, this time this is supposed to be a festival. But they mentioned both of them, and so the Gemara is wondering why. So of course they're going to come up with more than one answer.
Okay. It was necessary, they say, to specify both. Had Mishnah specified only a newly flowing spring, I might have reasoned that permission was given here to irrigate a parched field, even though the spring might collapse, but it would not be permitted to irrigate a moist field. But if the spring was an established one, unlikely to collapse, you could irrigate even a moist field with it.
Okay, so that's what they're saying the rationale is. If it's an established spring, likely this field is normally getting watered, as opposed to a new spring. So even a moist field can be watered. I think about, we actually have friends who are now involved with the irrigation, like irrigation ditches, because they have horses, they move to horse property. And they have 1 day a week where they're allowed as much water as they can get in 8 hours. So they have to make sure that the entire field is completely and thoroughly soaked. And I think it's between like 4 p.m. and midnight on Saturday nights. That is their designated time. Because between midnight and 8 a.m. or whatever, all of the times are designated. So somebody has, somebody gets the evening of Saturday, and that's the time that they've got. And if you've been to Rancho San Rafael, you can actually watch how they end up watering an entire field from these little irrigation ditches. So if we were living somewhere else, we might not have the same kind of appreciation for the need to keep even moist fields moist, and certainly to water parched fields.
Mishnah therefore informs you that it makes no difference whether the spring is new or established. You may use it to water a parched field, but not a moist one. How do you know what the Mishnah's expression Beit ha-shlachim means parched? The Targum of you were faint and weary is Va'at shalhi bilah.
Okay, so if you pick up the footnote, please.
Let's see, footnote 1. The Aramaic translation of faint has a similar root to the term Mishnah used for the field. How do we?
So you've seen how they're figuring out what that means? Parched. They're even asking, what does the Mishnah mean? And they're like, what, less than maybe 100 years, less than several generations away from the Mishnah itself. But yet they're still looking for, how do we know it means parched? Okay, which I find an interesting comment.
But it's exactly the way now the translation of Tanakh is determined by looking in what context the words are used.
Who else used it in what other
What-
circumstances? Yes. Yeah, sure.
And this is definitely the same root here.
Right. Right.
Okay. How do we know that Bet Ha-Baal denotes a moist, literally satisfied field?
And then we have another proof text.
The verse for as a young man takes satisfaction with the virgin is rendered by the Targum, for as a young man is satisfied with the virgin, your children will find satisfaction in you. The root of the word, like the one in the Mishnah, is Gersham, Bet Lamed, as in the name Baal, has to do with mastery. It also has a strong sexual connotation and is often translated by euphemism.
Okay, so
So the moist field is the euphemism?
euphemism means that a satisfied field, how do we know that a field, Baal, means satisfied? Well, they're pulling from Isaiah, okay? So a moist field takes satisfaction with a virgin. Okay, so that's what they're using to come up with their proof text. It's a euphemism because it's not a moist field. It doesn't exactly literally say it, so it's an allusion to.
Okay. Which Tana is it who holds that avoidance of loss is permitted on intermediate days, but making profit is not?
Okay, so there's a difference between avoiding loss in monetary terms and making a profit. So they're going to ferret this little piece out. Avoiding loss or financial loss is different than actually going about making profit in certain conduct.
Isn't euphemism is when there are some taboo words that you substitute for something else?
It could be, but it doesn't have to be. A euphemism is, and certainly that's perhaps a common way
all right.
of using the word
But
euphemism.
any substitution.
Any
of word is-
substitution, right? So, and we often a very similar word is allusion.
Mhm.
So an allusion to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Metaphor.
yeah, like that, like a metaphor.
A good
Exactly.
euphemism might toss like a balloon. It's full of hot air.
What would be a literal translation of euphemism?
Euphemism.
Euphemism.
Then we need to wiki that.
You want me to do it later?
No, we could do it right now. We'll look up.
Because why wouldn't they use metaphor? What's the difference between metaphor and euphemism?
Euphemism.
Euphemism.
I saw that like when you cannot use sexual words with sexual connotations in Tanakh, and sometimes they replace.
No, I mean the actual definition of the word.
Oh, it would be interesting to see.
Okay, so I think I picked
'Cause I-
examples instead of, okay, we have,
Because a metaphor is when you give an example of something, so obviously I could see a moist field being compared to a virgin in sexual connotation.
okay, so a euphemism, like, instead of saying a trailer park, because that's kind of derogatory, they would say a mobile community, because it sounds nicer.
That's
So-
a euphemism?
Euphemism,
That's a euphemism.
yes, that's one of the
When you
examples.
couch the terms in more desirable example.
In a slightly different way. You could, and it's also often, I'm saying often, substituting an inoffensive term for one that's considered offensively explicit, like
So a
this.
euphemism is considered to be something more palatable. It's a more palatable way of making an example,
Yeah,
a comparison.
yes,
A
Yes.
metaphor would be more, so a euphemism is,
I think Diane got it.
I got it.
I think that it's making it sound nicer.
It's taking the
Something that's a
negative,
problem.
the negative out of it, because trailer park might be seen as white trash,
Or whatever a negative is, and changing those words to something
more palatable.
Right.
So it's a more,
desirable
yeah,
term.
right. Okay, so instead of just doing a metaphor, which could go either way,
Right,
a euphemism
yes,
is generally used in a positive.
correct, yes.
Okay, I'm with you.
Okey doke.
Well, that's all.
You know, I think.
It's understanding what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it.
Yeah.
No, I think the problem here, they've been sitting in the academy too long and dreaming.
Well, I think I might have to read Isaiah next because it's always referenced to.
It would be very nice to see Hebrew original of these sentences.
And that's not a problem either.
And then to find out why.
All you have to do is just,
Well, I think Judy's right though, because then we could find out why are they making these
they're
comparisons.
making the comparison with the word satisfaction. And they're not
And they're
using
using it for the man and not the woman, but the woman is the field. The connotation is the woman is the land, right?
Yes, the fertile land.
Yes,
But
she's
that's
the
not-
moist
they're-
field.
They're not, yes, but they're not exactly headed there. They're just, at this point, I think, looking kind of like in a Rashi Pashut standpoint.
For as a young man is satisfied with the virgin, your children will find satisfaction in you.
So
So then
Isaiah
we go
62.
from the male satisfaction, then we go on to a familial satisfaction, that the children are satisfied with the parents
But
who could
this
be
is that-
representative.
All that is quote from the Targum, from Isaiah. It's just quote from Targum. That's all.
What does Targum mean?
Since I happen to have my handy dandy
Right.
search up here, well, because then you ask me in what date. Targum is a translation of Torah.
I can't keep it all straight sometimes. Sometimes I need, it's like I have to write it down and have it on the wall and look at it periodically.
I don't think Rev would want you writing on the wall.
She can write on her own.
Yeah, I'd write on my own. Because it's, sometimes I can't remember what everything means.
There are actually several Targum, but let's do Targum Onkelos.
You wouldn't say Targum.
Targumim. There are several. Targum Onkelos is probably the most common or thought about, and is actually often in, for example, I think the Targum Onkelos is in the Art Scroll published. So, an Aramaic translation to Torah. This is Onkelos, Targum Onkelos. It's attributed to Onkelos, a famous convert to Judaism in Tannaitic times, somewhere around 35 to 120 CE. And I think that probably should do as a just beginning piece. Did you have any other question about it?
I'll look it up more later.
Okay.
Well, this sentence Isaiah ki yiv'al bahur betulah yivalu. So it's, and in this same verse, it's mesos hatan al kala. That's like in this.
Yes, the brachot.
The hadadi.
Yeah, yes, I was actually thinking in some of the Sheva Brachot.
Oh,
I
there's
think.
also there again. I see, but mesos hatan al kala. Yesis alai Eloi. This is exactly what the phrase. This is part of the same verse 5, but it's basically about the satisfaction that the young groom makes of his
So Baal.
virgin wife or something.
So Baal is the terminology.
But it's also husband, Baal.
Yeah, absolutely. So Baal here, they're using as
Yes.
satisfied, coming up with saying that it's a satisfied field. Okay, which means one that's water. All right, moving on. Which Tanakh?
Oh, which Tanah is it who holds that avoidance of loss is permitted on intermediate days, but making profit is not? Rabbi Huna says it is Rabbi Eliezer ben Jacob,
Yaakov or Jacob?
Yaakov. For a later Mishnah states, Rabbi Eliezer ben Jacob says, you may channel water from one tree to another, provided you do not irrigate the whole field. You may indeed infer from this that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that work merely for a profit is not allowed, but how do you know that he permits heavy work to avoid loss?
It's the beginning of drip irrigation.
There you go. That's exactly it. Channel it to a tree, and that's okay. But you can't create all new channels, is at least what Rabbi Eliezer is saying.
Yeah, because that would be work, I understand that.
So, but even heavy work to avoid a loss. So we're moving on to Rav Papa. Mike, do you want to pick up Rav Papa?
Rav Papa said it is Rabbi Judah for Baraita teaches, if a spring erupts in the intermediate days, you may use it to irrigate even a moist field. According to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Judah says, you may only use it to irrigate a parched field that is ruined.
Ruined. So why would you use it for a ruined field? But we're more on that.
Rabbi Eliezer ben Azara says, you may do neither. Moreover, said Rabbi Judah, on intermediate days, a man may not divert a channel of water to irrigate his vegetable garden or his ruined plot. First of all, why would you go if the plot's ruined? I don't understand.
That is exactly the next question, so
Yes.
go ahead.
What does it mean by ruined? It is literally.
If
If it is literally ruined, what is the point of irrigating it? Abaye says he means ruined by the failure of its original spring. But another one has erupted, and to this, Rabbi Eliezer responds, it makes no difference whether or not the original spring has failed. You may not use a newly flowing spring.
So maybe you can, maybe you can't. These are different questions of water law. And interestingly enough, just a side note, on the Nevada bar, one of the very few states that has water law is Nevada. So when people have to take the bar in Nevada, they actually have to learn water law. So,
So you're trying to see if you can log down in water law.
you could. Do you want to finish up the page there?
If that is what you think.
Oh, wait a second, I think we missed one paragraph.
Did I?
How does the
Oh,
bride
yeah.
apply?
How does it, thank you. I was getting ahead of myself usually. How does the bride imply that Rabbi Judah holds that the avoidance of a loss is permitted on intermediate days, but the making of a profit is not? Perhaps when Rabbi Judah permits irrigation only a parched field, not a moist one, he is speaking of a newly flowing spring and is worried that it might collapse. But in case of an established spring, which is unlikely to collapse, he would permit irrigation even a moist field. If that is what you think, whose opinion does our Mishnah accord with? None. So we must conclude for Rabbi Judah, whether the spring is new or established, you may irrigate a parched field, but not a moist one. When the Mishnah speaks of newly flowing spring, this is to tell you how far Rabbi Meir is prepared to go. Excuse me.
Sure. So just.
He's willing to go all the way. Their gates are opened.
Now let's see here. How's this go? He permits you to irrigate even a moist field and even with a newly flowing spring.
Okay, so we have a difference of opinion between Rabbi Judah and Rabbi Meir. All right, so now we're going to move on.
The sages forbade shaving and laundering during the festival in order to ensure that that people did these things in advance and looked their best when the festival began. Certain categories, for instance, a person released from imprisonment, one who has returned from a long journey, or one whose period of mourning is ended, as the festival began, were permitted to shave on intermediate days, since it was not permissible for them, it was not possible for them to do it earlier. As the topic of mourning was mentioned, the editors chose to review the laws, since they are nowhere systematically presented in Mishnah. Leviticus sets out a list of relatives for whom is obligated to mourn, and there is a mention of mourning for prominent leaders such as Jacob, Genesis 51:14, and Aaron Numbers 20:29, and Moses Deuteronomy 34:8. But the Torah has little to say on mourning procedures for ordinary people. The most intense period of mourning, the 7-day Shiva, begins with the day of burial. A common Jewish expression to sit Shiva refers to the period when the mourner sits on the ground or a low stool and are visited by those offering your condolences. This is followed by Shloshim, the 30 days included the first 7. They include the first 7. A time of less intense mourning. Parents are mourned for 12 months.
Shiva, it's 7. I never thought of it.
Yes, yes, yes.
The mission.
Although often, I mean, from a minhag standpoint, people don't often in our community do all 7. So that's just often how it goes. And some people, you can't even talk them into it at all, but that's a different story.
Are there communities, a fair amount of communities in the United States that do?
7 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
Does it
generally
depend on the
speaking,
larger?
I'd say a larger, like our community is rural, and as a rural Jewish community, we have different considerations and probably minhag.
We have to go make sure that our parched fields get the right water on the intermediate.
Especially
So
in the
it takes
desert
a lot
here.
of time. Yeah.
There's truth in that. There's truth in that metaphor.
Of course, absolutely.
But
Or is that a euphemism? You were being positive.
Euphemism.
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 You choose to whatever definition that you would like to have it adhered to.
There you
Well,
go.
that was a positive spin on it. I, you know, geographically it's going to vary. So it doesn't. It's not the size of the town. It's just the minhag of the area.
I think there's some of
But-
that, yeah.
in Emmanuel, there were quite a few 7-day Shivas that
Where?
in our temple, in
In a
Emmanuel.
conservative
In
setting,
Emmanuel, I mean,
it's the one thing, honestly, that Emmanuel does the best. They are the best at taking care of the end of life kinds of things. That is their huge strength in our
well,
community.
when they were teenagers, they were very good at doing bar mitzvahs.
And
but-
that could be too.
But
Yeah.
it's just that now the population is old, and the group is very old. They already been together like for 30 years. Yeah. So when there is a mourning period, in fact, there was one guy fairly young that died by the time they already switched to Sinai. They were not members of Manuel, but when he died, the girl spent basically all the time with Lynn, because
Right.
they, I mean, basically the Shiva was set at their home, and our temple people who knew them for a while before went there for 7 days.
Yeah, and I think that
I haven't seen it like in the East Coast anyway. Like, for me, it's kind of new.
yeah, from I would say it depends generally on the size of the community. From a Sinai standpoint, people who are in the community often do 3 days. People who are unaffiliated sometimes choose not to do it at all. So that's,
I watched a VHS tape. I think it was in one of the boxes of books that you had given me. And it was showing the decline of a synagogue in the South, that it had once been flourishing, and there wasn't the attendance anymore. And it was a building without a congregation.
But this is like the
That's why I was asking Mike that day about it, because there's similar situations I've seen where there's clubs that where the older members are starting to die off and there's no younger ones to take over.
But sometimes the purpose for the establishment of that is gone from the area.
That's right.
You know, and
Maybe they've moved away.
Yeah,
that's usually
I-
the situation.
you have a situation, center of family moves. People lived there. Maybe the congregation got together in early 1900s, late 1800s. It was an agrarian area. Maybe they had farms, you know, etc.
So they were able to support the local synagogue, and then there's migration out.
But it's not just Jews there, it's
whole
the whole
purpose of the-
area. Economic situation that the thing is that I read a book about small churches It's mostly about, it's written by a
Christians.
priest, yeah, who spent all his career dealing with small churches, and it's his experiences, which is very useful, kind of, to understand small congregations. And the stuff that he's describing from one to another, he gives a lot of examples, is very similar.
Right, I
Very
just looked at a
similar.
book that
The
had
feeling
something to
of
do with
offending,
building.
A bit of claustrophobic people that suspicious of outsiders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They is in some remote community, and
Yeah,
they
because
keep their
we live in
own
the hills of
biases.
West
You know,
Virginia.
if they were anti-black, they continue to be like anti-black. Even so, the world around changed. They remain very set in their ways.
If you take a look, probably the most classic examples you could find in the United States are some of the areas of the Old South that existed and changed during Reconstruction. The areas of part of New England, especially part of the southern part of Vermont, Connecticut, New Hampshire, because they had power in terms of utility power, not in terms of electricity. There were a tremendous amount of streams. It was easy to build mills that process grain, power for factories, because they used water wheels for the power. And they came inside and they drove belts that were run all over the factory to operate machinery, lumber yards, knitting mills. And since the change in power came into the United States, not political power, utility power, went from water power to electrical power. Then you didn't have to be in those rural communities by use streams for mills, for knitting mills, for factories for making gun barrels, etc. So they were able to disperse away from the country to different parts of the country. Those communities kept getting smaller and smaller. So the amount of churches, synagogues, etc. weren't needed there.
And sustainable.
Yeah. Although, at least in our area, it does seem that there tends to be like an influx from California. So our population base in Nevada over the last 10, 20 years has certainly increased. So.
Okay, the Mishnah deals with, is that word? Yeah.
Yes.
The Mishnah deals with a conflict that arises when a period of private mourning clashes with a festival. The sugya on mourning is somewhat loosely constructed, perhaps because there is so little information in Scripture. The rules evolved as a social custom rather than a law. Several Tananim take a position at variance with the Mishnah in accordance with Shmuel's principle, 19b, that the respect of the law for mourning, the decision goes according to the more lenient authority. It is decided that so long as the period of Shiva or Shoshlim commences before the festival cancels it.
All right, so moving on to the Mishnah. If someone buries his dead 3 days prior to a pilgrim festival, the law of Shiva ceases to apply to him. If 8 days prior to the festival, the laws of Shloshim do not apply. The principle is, or at least according to the literal, for they say, Shabbat is counted as a day of mourning, even though outward signs of mourning are forbidden, and does not cut short the period of mourning. Festival days cut short the period of mourning, but are not counted towards the period of mourning. Rabbi Eliezer said, since the destruction of the temple, Shavuot in this respect like the Sabbath. Rabban Gamliel says Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are like pilgrim festivals in this respect. The majority of the sages, however, say that the law is according to neither, but Shavuot is like a pilgrim festival. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are like the Sabbath. So in terms of how long do you have to mourn, is it cut short by either Shabbat or one of the festivals? This is something they're still working out in terms of the timing on this. So moving on to the Gemara. The rabbis taught, a man must mourn for all those relatives specified in the priestly code. The code here refers to Leviticus 21 and 22, for whom a Kohen must defile himself by burying them. So they're listed. So they are a wife, father, mother, brother, virgin sister, son, and daughter. Rabbis added maternal brother, maternal virgin sister, married sister, whether paternal or maternal. This is much like our laws of succession, who actually gets to take property, like, intestate succession. So if someone dies, who is the next of kin? Rabbi Akiva says, just as he mourns for them, he mourns for their seconds. So that means
The
father's
second,
father, son's son, daughter's son, sister's son. Rashi came to help us out to explain what Rabbi Akiva was talking about there. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar say, only seconds he mourns are for his son's son, or his father's father. So direct either grandson or grandfather. The other sages say, whoever he mourns for, he mourns with. So if his father's father dies, he mourns together with his father. Doesn't what the sages say come to the same as what Rabbi Akiva says? The difference between them is that the sages rule that he should mourn only if he's in the same house as the principal mourner, whereas Rabbi Akiva rules that he should mourn irrespective of whether he's in the same house or not. This is like what Rav told his son Chia and Rav Huna told his son Rabbah. When you are with her, or your wife, when she's mourning for a relative, observe the mourning rites. When you are not with her, don't observe them. A son of Mar Ukva's mother-in-law died, so he decided to observe Shiva and Shloshim. Rav Huna paid Mar Ukva a visit. Will you eat this interesting word of uncertain etymology, but some kind of food for mourners, according to Rashi? Suratanaita? Will you eat this? When they said you should observe mourning out of respect for your wife, that was only if your father-in-law or mother-in-law died, as the Brida teaches. If someone's father-in-law or mother-in-law died, he may not oblige his wife to make up with kol, which, at least according to some, is eyeshadow.
Egyptian.
Or rouge, pardon?
That coal is Egyptian.
Okay, or rouge, but should overturn the couch, which is actually a mourning custom of literally overturning something that people sit on, and observe the mourning rites with her. The same goes for her, and generally that is the case generally in terms of mourners, and there are some who say not only do not dress up or bathe or whatever, there's no requirement, but that one is certainly obliged not to wear makeup and that kind of thing, and to cover the mirrors. So that's another piece. So the same goes for her. If her father-in-law or mother-in-law died, she should not make up with kohl or rouge, but should overturn the couch and observe mourning rites with him. But another Brida states, even though they say that he may not oblige his wife to make up with kohl or rouge, she may pour out his cup, make his bed, wash his face and hands and feet. Isn't this a contradiction? It must be that the one Brida deals with a case where his father-in-law or mother-in-law died, and the other where some other relative had died. That is proof. Another Brida states explicitly, when they said you should observe mourning out of respect to your wife, that was only if your father-in-law or mother-in-law died. The son of Amemar's son died, and Amemar rent his garments over him. When Amemar's son arrived, Amemar again rent his garments. Then Amemar realized that he had rent his garments sitting, so he got up and rent them again standing. Rav Ashi then asked Amemar, what's the basis for standing to rent garments? And of course, Amemar is going to bring us a text from Job. Then Job stood up and rent his robe. So this is where that custom of kriya, or renting of the garments, comes from. And in this particular case, for Amemar, it wasn't good enough that he had done it sitting. He wanted to do it as Tanakh had said, which is to do it standing.
So it's the custom actually comes from the book of Job?
It's right here. Job stood up and rent his robe.
I'm just finishing up on my commentary on that.
Ashi, in that case, what about, and he stands and says, I don't wish to marry her. Must he stand to proclaim his refusal? Baraita states, whether sitting, standing, or lying down. Maimar replied. So this is Ashi talking back to Maimar. You don't have to stand up to do this. You can sit down, because look, I'm bringing another proof text, right? So he's arguing with him. Whether sitting, standing, or lying down, and Maimar replied, Deuteronomy does not say, and he stood. Job says, he stood up and rent his robe. So he's saying it's more specific. Rami Bar Chama commented, what is the basis there for standing to rent garments? Job stood up and rent his robe. Perhaps Job did something beyond the normal requirement. Maybe he didn't have to do it. Indeed, you have to say Job's behavior was excessive. Otherwise, he cut off his hair. Would have applied literally too.
Stop.
So in other words, let's
Today when you use the black ribbon,
yes, Korea.
you're right, and it's cut. And that sometimes you're watching what goes on at the cemetery. And sometimes you see it when it's cut when they're sitting down, and other times when they're standing up.
Because in our sort of informal, rural Jewish, not Orthodox world, nobody's going to say, hey, stand up because Job stood up. Even though when we also, like at the time of cutting a Kriya ribbon, we say, Adonai Natan, Adonai, God gives, God takes. So, which is a phrase from Job. There's not a particular method, or it's minhag. Almost all of these are minhag, as opposed to something at a Shulchan Aruch. So something at a Shulchan Aruch is going to be generally something very specific, like, tahara. And it's not going to give you the details of it, which is generally say. Or needs to be buried in tacharin or shrouds that are plain. But it's not going to give you, well, how do you sew it for men, or how do you sew it for women, right? So a lot of these little teeny pieces of whether you stand or sit, you're right, sometimes they're done sitting, sometimes they're done standing. And really the only reason that we cut them, the Kriya ribbons, especially the old ones that we used to get, they were done with this ribbon that was like nearly impossible to rip. So the rabbi would come and clip the end of it to make it easy to pull the ends.
Boy, am I glad they didn't do the circumcision.
Well,
Those ribbons were tough. Yeah, I know. What do you do?
so what does a ribbon look like?
They're
It's
the
just
ones
like
that they get.
It's just like a piece of ribbon, and there's
Do you like pin it to your
cut,
clothing, and
right.
then from your clothing, then you rip it?
Well,
Right.
yeah, if they
It's put over
The heart.
Right.
There's a little metal, like any button, and there's black on the button, and there's ribbon that comes down from this, like just kind of like stick in.
And there's usually two pieces of ribbon, one behind the other.
Well, generally the ones that I've seen, we only have a single ribbon, and then they're clipped and then cut. So it looks.
So you can
doesn't
tear
appear that
it,
there's
but
two, it's a
they
single.
literally during the funeral.
Usually prior to like the funeral actually starting, this is done.
Okay.
Adonai Natan, Adonai Lekach V'Yehishem, Adonai Mevorach. So Adonai gives, Adonai takes. May the name of God be blessed. So whether things are good or things are bad, whether God is giving or whether God is taking, we bless the name of God. Same with when someone dies, it's Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed is God, the true judge.
And the entire Kaddish is basically a blessing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. No, it is, because how much difference is the Kaddish than when you start what is the prayer before you start reading?
Well, actually, it's both.
Or we
both are
so
No,
No,
he's
it's
talking
just-
about Kaddish for learning and Kaddish for the day.
Right.
Kaddish to Rabbanan,
Rabbanan.
very
Right.
same, just like one line difference.
Yeah.
Right.
Hatzi Kaddish, just half.
Yeah, the Hetzi Kaddish, yeah, it's referred to.
So
from
Hatzi
Ramadan,
Kaddish,
yeah.
Hatzi Kaddish comes at the end of a section of whatever we've done in liturgy. So we
Closure.
start out with Baruch Hu, we end with Hatzi Kaddish, move on to the next section.
Mhm.
So
And there is this Kaddish, the Rabbanan, which is this, I don't know exactly where it's inserted, but it's entire Kaddish except for starting.
it's done at the beginning of Shacharit,
Shacharit.
and usually there's a little piece of studying that's done prior to the Kaddish Rabbanan.
Okay. So, and the words of this Kaddish, the Rabbanan, I discovered it when Steve's mother died. He was in the hospital in Florida, and he said to go and get a book with prayers. And I went, there was like a little chapel there, and I opened like, it's all Hebrew, there is no any translation, the only book. And I found that, and you go through that, and so it looks the same. And then he got to the point where it was becoming
Slightly different, yes.
slightly different at the end. And I just kept my mouth shut, but I just, oh my God, I got the wrong Kaddish.
Yeah, it's like there's 2 lines different, it's kind of somewhere
Oh.
in the middle.
There was, yeah, and then when you look at the beginning, it looks exactly the same.
Yes, it does, it does.
And you get into your cadence, your rhythm.
Right, and then you
And
can
it's
get to that and typically
in
we do it.
Aramaic, it's like difficult secondary force.
Okay, so now we're talking about whether we have to do it sitting up, standing. And, okay, so Rami Bar Chama is trying to make a point. Wait a second, Job did something beyond, because otherwise people would be required to cut their hair also, like Job. Job cut his hair, right? But we don't apply that literally. So we're still going to talk about this for a bit. So we derive it from here. The king arose and rent his garment. All right, so this comes from Samuel. No, perhaps David did something beyond the normal requirement. Indeed, you have to say that David's behavior was excessive. Otherwise, you have to also accept this part, which says, and he lay upon the ground, would have applied literally too. However, Bright states, if he sat on a couch, a chair, a teacher's chair, or on the floor, he has not complied with the law. And Rabbi Yochanan said, this is because he has not complied with the rule to overturn the couch. Okay, so what is this teacher's chair? On footnote 9, it says, according to Jastrow, it's an obscure word, and that's the best they can do with it. So, Rami Bar Chama replied, Scripture meaning that David lay on the ground on the upturned couch, as if on the ground. The rabbis taught. Okay, so now we're going to move into more sections. Do we have to stand up? Do we not have to stand up? Okay, there's argument about it. They're bringing different proof texts. In the case of Job, in the case of King David, what is it necessary to do or not? And they're leaving that kind of not addressed as a final, but they do have several opinions about it. Rabbi Bar Chama replied, okay, Scripture means that David lay on the upturned couches upon the ground. The rabbis taught, go ahead and pick up there.
So an upturned couch is a couch turned upside down.
Right, because in those
And how do you
days,
lay on an upside down couch?
well, apparently that's what he
Upside
did.
down.
This is what they're saying that,
Seems like it would be
David
very
did.
uncomfortable.
there would be
No,
that,
but
but
the
his comment was he laying on the ground, because it says he laid on the ground. But Rabbi
As
Bar
if on the
Chama,
ground.
to make his argument, is going to say he didn't actually lay on the ground, he laid on the upturned
And
couch.
by the
As
way,
if on the ground because it's not comfortable.
To make his argument
just to
that you don't have to follow the part about laying on the ground.
and by the way, the couches, even now in the East, are not with the backs, you know. There's some pillows thrown in the back.
Right,
So
so
when you
yeah, so
overturn
when
the
you
couch,
flip it upside,
you
right.
basically have whatever the bottom side of the flat box is, rectangular box, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
And how they were made, God knows, how they padded them or whatever.
Yeah, so Steinsaltz in one of his Talmuds
that's
has a
interesting.
picture of an upturned couch.
Okay. The rabbis taught, these are the things a mourner must not do: washing, anointing, sexual intercourse, wearing shoes. He must also not read Torah, prophets, hagiographa, or study Mishnah, Midrash, Halachot, Talmud, or Agadah. However, if the public are dependent on him for learning, he may do so. When Rabbi Yossi's son died in Sepphoris, he attended the house of study and expounded Torah throughout the day.
What is
Wow.
the word after prophets?
Oh, hagiographa. There's a number of extraneous books that are not part of our normal,
Tanakh.
Tanakh.
What is the difference between
Hag-
apocrypha and hagiographa?
Apocryphal and hagiographa. I'm sure there's some technical difference. Just to answer yours, it's things like the book of Enoch, the books of Judith, there's a number of them.
Maccabees.
Maccabees. So exactly what are the difference? I don't know. You'd have to ask a history professor and/or somebody's going to need to Google that one too.
Google. Okay.
Or good search it and give a penny
Yes.
to Temple Beth Lord, right?
Rabbi Bar Hana suffered a bereavement. He thought he should not go out to deliver the lesson, but Rabbi Hanina reminded him if the public had depended on him for learning, he may do so. He thought it would be all right to appoint an assistant to deliver the lecture, but Rav said to him, "Write a teacher, so long as he does not appoint an assistant,
So he's basically, if he wants to do it, that's one thing, but if he appoints an assistant, no, he's in mourning. He's going to have to teach his assistant how to do it.
So what could he do? He acted similar to what is reported in a Beraia. The son of Rabbi Judah Bar Elai died. He nevertheless entered the house of study. Rabbi Hanina ben Akavia came and sat next to him. He whispered the lecture to Rabbi Hanina ben Akavia. Rabbi Hanina ben Akavia rehearsed it to the assistant, and the assistant delivered it to the public.
Okay, so assistant or non-assistant. All right, next week we're going to pick up on Hagigah, or the festival of sacrifice. Tודה רבה.